Please remember, the information in our podcast could be a trigger for some people. And if you or someone you know has been affected by sexual abuse, the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre 24-hour helpline is 1800 77 8888.
Hello, I'm Joyce.
I'm June. And I'm Paula. We're the Kavanagh Sisters, and we'd like to welcome you to our series of County In podcasts, where we continue to shine a light on childhood sexual abuse and its impacts. In today's podcast, we'll be talking to Maeve Lewis, CEO of One in Four, a charitable organisation dedicated to supporting adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Founded in 2003 and located at 2 Hollis Street, Dublin 2. And the phone number is 01 662 4070. Maeve is a proud Tipperary woman and is the recipient of the University of Limerick's 2019 Alumni Award for outstanding contribution to society. The university also acknowledged Maeve's international work in post-conflict situations and her contribution to the International Criminal Court as an expert witness in sexual trauma. We will be including a link at the end of this post which will include Maeve's extensive credentials.
We don't have all day.
Yeah. We'll just kick off by asking Maeve to give us just a broad description of the organisation. I'll just give you the opportunity to just explain yourself.
Okay, thanks, June. Well, One in Four works with adult survivors of child sexual abuse, men and women. About half our clients are men, and people often don't appreciate that.
Brilliant.
Yeah. We also work with the families who have been impacted by sexual abuse, and we also have a prevention programme where we work with people who have caused sexual harm to children. For survivors of abuse, we have a number of programmes. So our advocacy programme is there to help people who want to get involved in the criminal justice system or who want to make notifications to the Child and Family Agency about concerns they might have with children. The advocacy team support about 600 people a year, and almost every year now about 35 of those people would end up in a criminal trial, which can be very daunting and harrowing. So the accompaniment service we offer is great support to people.
That's quite a high number considering how few cases are ever brought, like
nationally. Yeah, it is, and we found year on year that the number of people who are willing to go to the Gardai in the first instance and then go right through the whole process, that number is growing. We don't know why, but I think maybe people, they see other people in court.
That's it, people are getting braver.
People are just getting braver. If you go to a criminal trial, you are entitled to anonymity so that your name will never be published. But a lot of people waive that right now.
That's right.
And they speak openly to the media, and I think that encourages a lot of other people to come forward. Now, there are other people for various reasons who absolutely do not want to be named, and in fact the fear of being named, I think, stops some people from coming forward. And it's very hard because, outside of Dublin, I'm from Tipperary, if there is a rape case in Nina, everybody knows who's involved. So it's very difficult to maintain being anonymous. Like we saw in the papers just the other day of that case down in Leitrim, where 2 guys were convicted of raping a girl they'd been in school with. But in the courtroom, some of their families stood up and said, "We'll get you back." And you're a liar. Yeah. That was after they'd been convicted. So that's very difficult, I think, especially for people who come from small communities.
But it was really well highlighted, and there was an arrest, wasn't there?
There was an arrest, and the Gardaí are investigating.
There's been action taken on it, so it wasn't just something you have to put up with. No. So that's a good thing. That's progress.
Yeah.
They're taking it a bit more seriously.
Oh, I think so. And the guards, in fairness, have set up units all over the country where detectives are specially trained to investigate these very sensitive and difficult cases. And that, I think, is going to make a big difference to how people are received if they walk into a Garda station and want to make a complaint. We find that with our clients, if somebody wants to make a complaint to the Gardaí, and that's always their own choice, that the guards will actually come in here to One in Four and meet them here, so they don't have to go into a police station.
With mandatory reporting, and so if a client comes to you and they're starting to receive treatment, and you're mandatorily responsible for reporting that. How do you work around?
What's your policy on that?
The difficulties.
TUSLA have a new policy out, so we've changed our policy. In the past, we used to really encourage people to give us the name of the person who abused them. We saw that as really important to protect other children. But TUSLA have changed their policy, which we are strongly fighting. So nowadays, if somebody doesn't want to give us the name, that's absolutely fine. We don't have to make that mandatory report.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
Now, what we find is that even though people don't have to tell us, very often as they progress through counselling,
They
change their minds,
Yes.
and they begin to realise, look, this was not my fault, this is not my responsibility. I am worried maybe that he's still abusing other children.
The TUSLA guidelines you're talking about is the recent crack that's coming out.
I'm glad you use that word.
They want to stress test the victim's statement in front of the abuser so that he has the right to ask him questions.
Well, I tell you, it would be over my dead body that any of our clients ever sit in a room with the person who abused them. That is just not.
We can't even comprehend. How old were we when Dad
26.
went to court?
I was 26.
I couldn't even look him in the eye. Like, I thought we were courageous. We were in the court now. This was time for us to stand into our own bodies and take back our power. It's still, in my mind, he still had all the power. I ended up having to look away and hating myself, feeling weak, and and I was thinking, my God, imagine him having the right to put questions to me in a room. That's
exactly it. And at least in a court of law, there is very strict procedures and guidelines and so on. Yes, you do have to go into court, and yes, the offender will be there. But I mean, the idea that a social worker would bring one of our clients face to face with the offender, and we all know how manipulative offenders are, how the dynamic of power will get played out.
The fact that they've said they're already implementing this, as in they're already got social workers in training to implement this, that's coming in July. How can we stop it?
Well, we're working very hard with some of the other support bodies. Like, one of the other things they're saying they have to do is to pass all information directly on to the offender.
Immediately.
So, we've got legal advice from expert lawyers who really understand data protection, and that is completely at odds with the data protection legislation. Mm-hmm. So we are undertaking a campaign.
So who even thought about this as protecting their rights?
There's been a whole load of High Court decisions which said that TUSLA, and before them the HSE, didn't offer fair procedures. Part of that is they must know what the complaint is and who's made the complaint, but it is absolute nonsense.
If you decide you're going to make a Garda statement, do you have to charge, or can you do that and ask them to keep on file in the filing cabinet until you decide?
A lot of our clients will have a conversation with a member of the Guards and then have a think about it and make a decision. It's not until you make a formal statement that an investigation is going to begin. So that is a possibility here.
Well, at the moment now, I'm just based on our case. When we made our statement, it was given automatically to him. And when he made his statement,
we never saw it.
We'd never seen it. It was pure accident that we actually had access to it. Is that the norm still?
Right.
Because he's entitled to know.
He is. I mean, look, well, in fairness, if somebody made an accusation against me,
you want to know.
I would want to know what the accusation was.
Yeah, but could I just go to you and say, listen, Maeve, Paul has just accused you of raping her when she was 3 to 7, say. Is that not enough information?
No, because, if you're going down the criminal justice route, there's very strict rules about evidence and disclosure and so on. Now, what has happened, and it tightens things up, is that in the past, say if one of our clients was going to trial, the Guards would contact us, they'd ask for counselling notes, they'd ask for all these things, and with the client's permission they'd be handed over. That doesn't happen anymore. It's the Director of Public Prosecutions, the DPP, who requests the counselling notes. They may redact some of the stuff out of the notes, and they are given to the legal team of the accused person with very strong provisos that they mustn't be copied, they mustn't be shared with any other people. Like in the past, we had situations where the abuser got all that information and was sharing it all around his friends and family and whatever. That can't happen anymore. And once the trial is over, regardless of what's happened, those notes have to be returned to the DPP, and I think they're kept on file there. So there is some safeguarding for a person, but I mean, if you get involved in a criminal trial, you have to know that your statement and any other information like counselling notes can be made available.
I think that's beyond sickening. Because surely the idea of counselling and the point of counselling is you go in somewhere safe and you're allowed to tell your whole story, knowing that it's between you and your counsellor.
Yeah, I mean, it's a choice people have to make, because some of our clients, when they realise that counselling notes, for example, could be used, decide they're not going to go ahead with the case. There is a new provision in the new Sex Offences Act since 2017 that it's possible for the complainant to go into court and to get independent legal representation before the judge to request that those notes would not be used, and then the judge will read the notes and decide whether they can be used or not be used, or part of them used, or whatever. So that's some small protection.
When I think of the things I would have said in counselling about other people that I wasn't even bringing charges against, I just can't tell you the damage that would have done to me.
Well,
if that wouldn't have been
that would be redacted. If there's third parties mentioned in any counselling notice, that's redacted.
And so, does the victim themselves have access to those files?
To the notes?
You know, their notes, their own.
Oh, absolutely. And because so many of our clients end up going to court, our therapists here take 3-line counselling notes. June came in today and she spoke about her father. That's it. Right. There's ways around it. There's ways to play the system.
And I would have access to it before that would go anyway.
If somebody was if a case was going to court, we would always invite the client in to read the notes, and they can make a decision then.
See, that's a bit of reassurance, right?
Yeah. Oh no, you'd always see the notes. In fact, if you're in counselling, you were always entitled to us to see whatever notes we kept about you.
I know, but I remember we weren't even on that level. But now, with the introduction of it, possibly going to a third party, now would be a bit more keen to have it.
But not only that, knowing that even having that information out there and available to you is very because then this is not the type of thing that people who in a crisis who ring up and say I really need help would be thinking of.
No.
We didn't even know we had a right to say, actually, I'm not clicking with this therapist, can I have a different one? We didn't know we had that right.
That is so important.
Yeah.
You know, it is so important. And some people prefer to see a woman, and some people prefer to see a man, so if at all possible, people really have the right to ask for that.
Right, well, that's very good.
It's just with those notes, it does feel like the victim's rights are being impinged on.
I mean, in the past, everything was stacked in favour of the accused person. That's in the Irish Constitution, and of course we all would want the right to a fair trial and all that. Things are changing though. There is an EU directive now on the rights of victims of crime. There's a new Victims of Crime Act here in this country. So slowly and surely, the people who have the courage to go forward and get involved in the criminal justice system have more protections than they used to have. There's a kind of a mindset now that recognises people who've been sexually abused are very vulnerable. Going into court is really harrowing, re-traumatising. So there are efforts, not enough mind you, but there are efforts there to try and make that experience somewhat easier for the person who comes forward.
Are the people in here as a centre who's providing treatment and support for people, do you ever get asked in an Irish court to go in and give evidence on victim behaviour or how people store memories or how they recall an incident or perpetrators' behaviour?
The Irish criminal courts don't, in sexual crimes anyway, don't ask for expert witnesses. Whereas, I mean, you mentioned, I've been over to the International Criminal Court as an expert witness, and they do listen to experts talking about trauma and sexual violence and the impact and how people might behave.
And why do you think Irish don't do it?
Well, it's just a very different system.
It's just, I know, like the Harvey Weinstein thing that everybody's talking about, and is it a win or is it not a win? One of the reasons they stated why he didn't get found guilty on 2 of the women's stories was because the jury felt their story wasn't coherent, and not only that they stayed in touch with Harvey after he had allegedly abused him. Now, anybody who understands victim behaviour would totally understand why they stayed in connection with this professional man. I think if the jury had been given access to somebody to explain how or why that could happen, then that verdict might have been very different.
Yeah, and you know, after the Belfast trial that we all were horrified to carry on, a huge report was produced by Judge Gillen. He was a retired judge, and one of his recommendations is that in crimes of sexual violence that the judge would actually educate the jury about the myths about rape and sexual violence, about trauma and so on. Come in or not, I don't know. There is a big review going on of trial of sexual offences here in the Republic, and we hope it will be out before the summer. It's well overdue at this stage. Tom O'Malley from the University of Galway is doing it, but I would really hope he'd make that sort of recommendation. But the other thing is, judges, barristers, everybody needs training about sexual trauma.
Anybody, any judge, barrister, lawyer, any of that organisation ever came into one of ours and said, we could really do with educating our staff on this.
No, that has never happened. The judges have a new judicial council that is to provide training. They may well be having training privately, I don't know, but we certainly have never been asked to provide training, and we would be very happy to do it.
And you would have a very unique point of view in the fact that not only do you deal with victims, you deal with perpetrators, so it would make sense why they would come and ask for that kind of information.
And also for judges to listen to people who've been through the court system, to hear, because I mean most of our clients who end up going through a trial will tell us that they felt humiliated, traumatised, their character torn apart. You know, it's a really, really difficult thing, and that's why people absolutely need the sort of support our advocacy officers can give. I mean, anybody would be out of their minds to go into a criminal trial without professional support going through it.
And then not having consistency in sentencing.
Yeah, in fairness, I think sentencing consistency has improved, certainly since I've been involved in this field, and the Supreme Court recently laid down guidelines for, you know, the type of sentence that would be appropriate for different types of sexual offences. So in the Central Criminal Court, sentencing is fairly consistent, maybe less so in the Circuit Court. But
there seems to be a couple of judges, or at least one in particular, everybody is signing petitions against and everything because of the sentences that he's handing down to...
and the non-sentences.
Yes.
And to be uneducated and sit on a jury to try and decide somebody's life is just ridiculous.
Yeah, and I suppose juries bring in all their stereotypes and baggage and myths and everything about sexual violence. But also, I suppose, for the first time in that Sexual Offences Act in 2017, a definition of consent was written into Irish law, which is the very first time. So that's a very positive move too. And it would include that if you're pissed, you're not capable of giving consent. So the fact you're pissed is actually irrelevant.
What services do One of Four provide, and to whom?
Okay, so we've talked about the advocacy service. So that would be for people who want to get engaged in the criminal justice system or with child protection services.
Do they have to be part of One of Four?
No. People just, loads of our clients just come and use the advocacy service. That service is free. There's no waiting list. You will be attended to immediately. And a lot of, say, therapists out there in private practice or indeed other organisations will refer people to the advocacy service. So you don't have to be attending counselling year at all. Our counselling service then, and we'd work with about 200 people every year in that service. Basically, if you ring up and you say that sexually abused, you'd like to engage in counselling, we really try to see somebody for a first meeting within 3 weeks, although that's not always possible. That's really just to have a conversation to see what the person needs. Is this the right place for them? Like there would be some situations, say if somebody's in a wild addiction, we might be referring them to addiction services before they come here.
Have you a waiting list?
That's the problem. Once you've had that meeting, you could then be on a waiting list, and it's often up to 6 months.
Is there any services in the interim?
There isn't really. We're so under-resourced, you know.
Have you got a figure on your waiting list?
Our waiting list at the moment is at about 40 or thereabouts, which doesn't sound huge because our waiting list was closed at the end of last year. We only opened it after Christmas, so it's just building up again.
And also on the basis that people tend to reach out in a crisis.
Exactly.
You don't know if you've lost your shot with helping them because they might not return.
Well, I'll tell you, when we meet somebody for that first meeting, if they're really in crisis, if they're suicidal, for example, we will fast track them in, find some way to see them. Well, and it's awful having to say sorry, you're going to wait. And it's not just us, all the other support services, the Rape Crisis Centre, everybody has a waiting list.
So what happens then when you decide we have to close down a waiting list? So I ring you, what can you do for me? There's no space.
We'll have a conversation on the phone and we'll refer you to give you the number for the national helpline so that you can talk to a telephone counsellor. It's absolutely awful. I mean, it's scary because we know of at least 4 people who've taken their own lives while they were on our waiting list before we ever got to see them. And that's gone back over the last about 7 years.
I know.
So when the waiting list is closed, we have no idea
of what's happening.
So it is an absolute disgrace, and that after all these years that services like One in Four, like the Rape Crisis Centre, the National Counselling Service, how everybody's got away, you know, and more people are coming forward, which is brilliant, but it's a real struggle to provide services. Moving on, when you do actually finally get allocated a therapist, a lot of the people who come here will be here for quite a long time. You probably know that.
Yeah.
You know, a 10-session model or anything like that just doesn't work. So typically people would be here for around 2 years, 2.5 years, 3 years maybe. Some people, after a period of time in individual therapy, will maybe go into group. That's not for everybody. That's up to the person. You know, it is not an easy journey, but we have a very low dropout rate, which is marvellous. And we have very experienced therapists, which you need, working with such a complex issue. And that people's lives really do change, you know, they really do change.
Is your building, is your staffing numbers, is it only money or is it the whole lot?
Well, it's money to employ more staff.
Right.
Our building, we're bursting out of the seams. We're here in Hollis Street now for nearly 20 years. So happily, TUSLA and the agency have both given us a grant this year to help us move. So we're currently actually looking for another building. Right. It's not easy though to find. Not everybody wants to have 1 and 4 in their building. It needs to be central because people travel from all over the country.
And do you feel there's a stigma attached because you help perpetrators as well as
Well, we'd have
victims?
to be careful. I mean, we can't have a building beside a school or, you know, obviously, or in a residential area.
But other than those practical issues where you're not putting anybody in danger, do you find, with the way the organisation is perceived, do you feel that's impacted negatively in any way?
I don't think so. You know, when we started working with offenders, and the only reason we do that is our clients started saying, well, what about my brother? What about my father?
Yeah.
They're never going to be convicted because I'm not going to make a complaint to the guards.
But they
What's there for them? What about the other children in the family? So we started working with the offenders. Nowadays we work with about 50 offenders every year.
Okay.
It's a 2-year programme. Again, some people think too good for them. It is tough. It is a very, very tough programme. And in truth, to actually really, really realise the harm you've caused somebody else and take responsibility for that is really, really difficult. In fairness, most of those guys come in because they've been caught.
It's not
or
voluntary.
indeed the police of the Gardai have raided and found stuff on their laptops or whatever. And when they come in, they usually really have a very distorted way of thinking about what they've done. So it's really about holding their nose to the grindstone. And
would you have any figures in your head of how many offenders you've kind of helped or worked with to date?
We've worked with about 240.
And do you have any stats on?
Yeah, we know about 4 of those offenders have re-offended. That we know of course. Because
that's not a bad statistic either.
No, it's a good statistic.
Absolutely.
So when they come in, it's a 2-year programme, and then they go into aftercare for another 2 to 3 years. The aftercare, they'll just come in maybe once every 2 months to a group, and that's really just to
maintenance programme.
Yeah. I mean, we also, as soon as the offender comes in here, we notify the guards, we notify TUSLA, and they'll be involved too, so there'll be child protection plans put in place and to make sure everybody's safe. We do some restorative justice here. Once or twice we've done it with offenders and their victim, but that's at the request of the victim, the survivor. What we have done a lot of work with is the families, because when we work with offenders' families, the dynamic that's going on in that family that allowed the abuse to happen is very complex. Very typically, most of the family will actually collude with the abuser, quite unconscious, and blame the victim, stigmatise the victim. So we do run a support group for the families of the offenders, as well as a different support group for the families of the survivors. But huge work has to be done with those families to make them see.
Absolutely.
It was not the child who was at fault.
Yeah.
It was the offender. It's a bit like an alcoholic family where everything works to support the alcoholic
and their thinking has been altered in a similar way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And also they're all paying the cost of that crime anyway. Absolutely. Because the stigma goes right across the family, and it's for life.
Yeah.
It doesn't go away, it's not temporary, and there's nowhere to turn.
Yeah.
Like really the families have to be involved, just as with the therapy, because we found a significant impact on our relationships when we began. But they didn't include partners, and in fact they almost reassured you at the get-go that you were 99% sure to lose your relationships.
Oh my God.
Fairness, it was new. The Rape Crisis Centre at that time dealt with rape, and they didn't know what to do.
And they showed you a list of likely traits to look at, that might be present if you're a victim, and also the reassurance that very few relationships make it through this. So you were absolutely terrified from the get-go.
But it was also instilled in you, like, if you really, really looked after yourself, you take this trip. you would do this journey. So you'd be going and saying, well, if he does, fuck him. If he's gone, like. And that was the attitude. And that was another form of brainwashing, though, because you felt if you didn't do that, it was because you didn't feel you were worth it.
And can I ask you, did your marriages break up?
Yeah, mine did.
Yeah, Joyce's did.
My
I don't know how mine made it through. Because I remember going home to my husband at the early days and saying, they showed us a list of things to look out for. And I said, you had more of them than I did. And he said, I'm like an open book. And I'm just literally having a conversation. Well, he flipped his lid. Don't try and throw all that psychobabble at me just because you're getting therapy. Don't. And I said, no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, no, we had more there. So yeah, our relationship suffered tremendously as a result of that. But I don't know, somehow I made it through because I'm brilliant.
I didn't.
Or naive.
It would be very difficult for anybody to go through that process, especially if their partner is not getting any support.
Yeah, and also, like, you do still have that huge sense, regardless of the mess inside, you have a huge sense that you want to belong. So you seek out some other fucked up person, and how could it last? Because you're so sick, and they're sick.
If they're not brought in and told, this is how your partner has been impacted, these are the likely outcomes, and how it's going to impact your relationship, straight away, sex is going to be an issue.
I think most people, especially once they begin to really explore in a detailed way, that sex for a while, now happily most people do regain their strong positive sense of sexuality.
How many years is it?
We're still working on that.
And in truth, well, I think a lot of relationships survive, but you're dead right. They will change because the person in therapy changes.
No, but also, you know, when you think, even if it's only about sex, and we know how important sex is to men, like, especially when we were with, that they felt if the sex was right, everything else would fall into place. But if it wasn't right, it was taken very personal, and that's quite understandable. But we couldn't tell them that it wasn't personal, because we were so...
Yeah, and I mean, that's where the therapist can help by having a conversation with the
and
person's
so,
partner.
with that in mind, what exactly work do you do with a family?
Well, with the partners, we would meet them. So most of the people that come in are partners or maybe parents of the adult survivors here. So people will come in, we'll meet the family or the individual for 1 or 2 sessions, and then we'll encourage them to join one of the family groups here, where they will be meeting people from other families who are going through exactly the same awfulness. People find that really, really positive and helpful. And in those groups, we'll discuss things like sexuality, all the other issues, the shame, the stigma, what the survivor needs. It's like an education for people as to what's happened, whatever. And what we find at the end of it is people want more. A lot of the families who've been in group here continue to stay in contact out of here because they can talk openly about what they're going through in a way they can't maybe with other people. So it's, again, we'd love to do much more of that work, but we always have family groups going right through the year.
So for a partner, he would have 1 or 2 sessions, and then he'd be referred to family.
To a family group.
He has an option of being in the family. Yeah.
Eamon wouldn't have gone to no family group, and I'd have been lucky to get him along to a session. Yeah. But he probably would have come to the 2 sessions.
Yeah, and I mean, we can do work with a couple as well. I mean, so they can have a conversation.
Right.
But unfortunately, we don't have the resources.
And the partner doesn't need to be, heavily involved. I think they just need to be brought in on it and informed and included. Yeah. If they have a particularly rough patch, then maybe you could ask to bring them in.
It is good though, because we wouldn't have that option. Yeah. Another big issue for us was walking in the door. Because, you may as well have a sign on you. I've been raped.
No, I get that. And I think people coming here would have the same feeling. Although a lot of people wouldn't know what 1 in 4 means. So people still feel that. And I mean, the minute you walk through the door, you were saying, I have a problem with sexual abuse. Either it's happened to me, or I'm the mother or father of somebody it's happened to. I should say too, we have an offender day here when there wouldn't be any survivors in the building in case any of the survivors worry that they might be in the waiting room with an offender. They won't be. That never happens.
Yeah, good. When you come in the front door downstairs, you're met with the receptionist. Do you know before you get here what therapist you're going to be seeing?
You would, yes. Yeah. You have an appointment with whoever.
Right. And if you come in downstairs, is it the therapist that comes down and then brings you up to the room?
No, what happens is Anne-Marie, who's our lovely and very experienced receptionist, she will bring you up to the waiting room, and then the therapist will come and find you in the waiting room and bring you to the therapy room.
Nice.
And they seem like nothing, but they're a big deal.
Oh no,
when
they're a
you're
big
in
deal, yeah.
a state.
Oh no, in fairness, I mean, Anne-Marie, and occasionally some of the other admin staff would be on reception, but they all know that this is all about the client. They want, that it's so important that people have a warm welcome, that they can go to the waiting room, that there's tea and coffee and biscuits there, that, that they're comfortable.
Just a trivial little thing. Where do you get parking for this building?
Well, that is a huge problem. I mean, there is parking over in Merrion Square, there's parking down on Feenan Street, but it's very expensive.
Right.
Yeah.
So you nearly always get parking in Merrion Square, but it's like $2.70 an hour or something.
Yeah.
So that is a problem.
360.
Where do you envisage you moving to?
Well, I don't think we
somewhere
can
here.
afford to stay around Merrion Square. It's a lovely area to be in, and it's lovely that clients, if they come out and they're upset after a session, can go over to the park and sit down and have a walk or whatever. I'd say we'd be going somewhere in Dublin 8, I mean, it'd be somewhere around Thomas Street would be fine, or over in Dublin 7, somewhere around Smithfield.
So now, the nitty-gritty, the cost. You were saying it's
it's on a sliding scale. I'd say most clients coming here pay about €30 for a session,
right?
But some people pay €5, and the full fee is €80. So if some very wealthy people come in here, they would be paying the €80. For the offenders, it's much more. They have to pay nearly €100 per group. But I mean, we receive very little funding for that programme, so they have to pay.
And how does the exchange of money take place?
Is it handed to the therapist?
It's usually down at the reception.
Right.
Prior or after?
After.
I mean, this is personal taste.
Say it. No,
I feel
easier to do
the start, because afterwards it feels like if you've had a particularly rough session, you're falling apart, introducing money into it feels wrong.
You paid somebody to listen.
It feels like they only sat there and listened to me because I'm giving them this money, or it's only an idea.
Well, listen, we can have a look at that.
And who decides when they're finished? You were saying a lot of people come here 2-3 years. Who decides when it's done?
That will be agreed between the therapist and the client. Okay. I mean, clients tend to know when they're coming to the end,
Yeah.
So that will be, discussed. And as I said, some people, maybe after 18 months, 2 years, will go into group, and that's really powerful as well. And so there's groups running all the time here.
Does anybody come in initially and go straight into a group?
No, we don't put anybody into group or suggest they go into group until they have a fairly substantial piece of work done. But we do get referrals from therapists, say in private practice, who are coming to that point with their clients who want to come into group. So we would meet those clients and get a sense of would that be.
But they'll already have been in therapy.
We do not put people into group unless they've had a substantial period. We did try here a couple of years ago to have just sort of short introductory groups for people on the waiting list, support groups really, until they were therapists. But actually we found people really didn't want to go into group.
But it is an option, and it's an option would have helped me.
Well, I mean, it's something we could think about. We're always trying to think about ways to do the waiting list.
Because just to have something in place that even if they don't take it up, they know it's there.
Now I'm assuming those groups are facilitated by
two therapists. Yeah.
Because a lot of people were thinking about setting it up like the AA support outside, and I personally think with this particular thing, you cannot do that without having trained professionals in a room.
They're offering something different, and it's not counselling. It's a bit like an AA meeting where you go, we trash out all the things that are going on at the moment. So we're not talking about my own shit. My fears are always with AA. Like, I think AA is a great thing and all, but I had a partner in AA for a long time, and I just felt they actually support each other to stay stick. No one was ever really challenged. They supported each other. He had a particular frame of mind that fucked him up big time, but he was supported to stay in that frame of mind because they were all the same. Whereas if there was a professional there, he could have been challenged and maybe, helped. But he felt because he had a sponsor and he could go and spill out all his crap, and he became a sponsor to somebody, I just seen danger signs there.
I'm just thinking of somebody who everybody said you need to go to therapy, you need to go to counselling. What is it?
The first thing I'd say is there's an awful lot of people out there who never go near a therapist, and who I think because maybe some good things happened in their life were able to live, a reasonably satisfied, content life. Maybe they met a really special partner, maybe, whatever.
Yeah.
But obviously I'm a therapist, so I do think I think the word
absolutely,
therapy. So what is therapy? Look, really it's just a chance to have a space, a private space, where you can get to know your therapist, where you form a very deep relationship if it's working, and gradually you allow that person to get to know you really, really well. So all the things you hate about yourself as well as everything you like about yourself, and you can just talk through everything that's happened to you. And gradually, like you've just been saying, by doing that, it's like you begin to realise, this was not my fault, there was nothing wrong with me, there is nothing wrong with me. Yeah, maybe I've picked up all sorts of ways of being in the world to try and cope with the pain, but I've other options now.
Yeah.
And by working through those, people really do go on to live lives that isn't contaminated all the time by the sexual abuse.
But the word therapy seems to intimidate some people, I think. You know?
Well, it also implies there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
That's an American thing, you know, you go and find yourself and all that crap. But it does imply there's something wrong with you, and you already believe there's something wrong with you.
Do you still think that's the case? Because just about everybody I know is in therapy, regardless of what.
Yeah.
But you probably
I don't
say
know.
it was your
Well, that's true. That's probably
Yeah.
true.
You only working with offenders who haven't been...
No, about half our offenders will go to prison.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially the internet offenders. And I mean, people tend to treat internet offenders less seriously. Every one of those images of child sexual abuse is a crime scene.
Do you think treatment for sex offenders that end up in prison should be mandatory?
But all the research would sort of show, it does show that you can't force people into those programs. I mean, people will turn up and go into the group, but will they really do the work? I don't think that's
Well,
No,
I
so
can't-
should it not be mandatory that they sit in a circle, say, where somebody highlights the impacts on victims? That they don't have to participate, but to hear it sometimes.
I
You
don't
never
think
know
that would
what
sink
could
in
go
with people. What I do think is to encourage people to get into treatment in prison is that there should be some advantage attached to that the release date would be earlier or something like that.
I don't believe you can change behaviour unless you know what your behaviour is and where it came from, why you do it, and then what damage it's done to you and to somebody other than
But
you.
another question is, there are a lot of people in prison who want to get into a programme and they can't get in because, again, the offender treatment programme in prisons is very under-resourced. You know?
That's a Better Lives one.
Yeah.
I'm assuming your funding has been cut, like everybody else's.
Well, it was cut back in 2009 in the middle of the crash. I mean, we lost about 40% of our funding.
Right.
That was just when the Ryan report came out. So that year the numbers trebled. Like they went up, there was about 1,600 people through here this year. It was that year, it was absolutely mad. Now those numbers have dropped back down to about 800.
So has it been reimbursed now? Is
No,
it?
not to the same extent, no. But there has been no funding cut since 2014. So
But there's also been no increase either.
No, about 50% of our funding comes from the HSE. About another 10% comes from TUSLA. About another 10% comes from the Department of Justice. Is that up to 70% or thereabouts? And then the rest is fundraising, the fees the client give us, donations. So we have to raise about 400,000 through fundraising, donations, fees. It costs about 1.1 million euros to run 1 in 4 every year.
And that's not running it at the capacity it should be running.
Exactly, yeah.
So if you could do exactly what you want to do, you know what the needs are now and you know what has to be done. If you were to meet those needs and do your thing, what would you need?
We need a bigger building. We need, like we have 7 therapists, psychotherapists here. If we had 12, that would be brilliant. I also think some of the services we provide, like the advocacy service and the work with the offenders, that's not happening anywhere else. I mean, the rape crisis centres around the country are doing very good counselling work. I would love if we could open a satellite in somewhere like Limerick or Galway. Like some of those offenders are coming up from West Kerry and from Sligo and Donegal and everywhere because there's nowhere. So if we had a place somewhere down the west, I think that would mean that a lot more offenders could get the treatment and stop abusing children, please.
We would like to thank Maeve for taking part in today's podcast. Her open and honest approach to assisting victims of abuse to gain access to supports that they so badly need is often overlooked. Her willingness to challenge the current government bodies, along with navigating the maze of legal procedures to ensure that clients' needs are placed front and centre at all times, gives us hope for a better future. So thanks, Maeve, we really appreciate all you do. Keep up the great work.
Thank you for listening. Hopefully some of the information we've shared will resonate with you and bring you to a place where you can have compassion for yourself. Please know that no matter how you feel or how you respond to the abuse, it was normal. We're hopeful and optimistic that those in a position of power to bring about change will be moved into action so we can finally eradicate childhood sexual abuse. So please spread the word and share the information.
The decision to heal from childhood sexual abuse places you on the most important journey of your life. You're in charge of this journey. Only you know what works for you and what doesn't. It takes as long as it takes, because there's no rushing it and there's no faking it. You have to feel it. And just as the ripple of pain that you're in goes out and impacts all of those around you, so does the healing. And the more you heal, the more everyone around you benefits from your healing. You've been listening to the Kavanagh Sisters podcast. You can contact us through Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, or email the kavanaghsisters@gmail.com.